Before we embark on a more detailed exploration of religion, it would be helpful to set the scene in two important respects. One is to summarize what we know of the history of religions, even if only briefly. This will allow us to see what it is we need to explain in terms of the grand sweep of how the religions we have came to be. The second is to summarize, again fairly briefly, the main approaches to the study of religion and what they have to offer us. This is especially important because the perspective I shall be taking is very different from those adopted by most scholars of religion. My approach is an evolutionary one, and so will be firmly grounded in our current understanding of evolutionary theory. For this reason, I will end by providing a very short summary of what an evolutionary approach entails. A very short history of religion. There has been a long-standing view, dating back to the end of the 19th century, that the history of religion comprises two major phases, an early animist phase and a later doctrinal phase. The term animism was coined in the mid-19th century, but its use to describe the early phase of religion was really due to the British anthropologist Edward Tylor in his 1871 book Primitive Culture. The term derived from the recognition that many of the tribal peoples who had been encountered during the European explorations of the 18th and 19th centuries believed that other living organisms, as well as springs, rivers, mountains and forests, were all imbued with spirits, anima, in ancient Greek and Latin. This conception of primitive religion was much criticized in the 20th century by anthropologists, many of whom came to see such labels as imperialist and racist. In fact, this criticism was a bit of a red herring for two reasons. First, what this criticism confused was a distinction between folk psychology and the way university-educated scholars think. Folk psychology is the way people naturally think about the world, partly as a result of their everyday experience of the world, some of which is, of course, culturally inherited from their forebears, and partly because of the way the human mind is designed. Second, we are all susceptible to these kinds of primitive beliefs because many of them seem to form the natural default in the way the human mind, or folk psychology, has evolved. This is not a matter of primitive versus advanced. Rather, it reflects the overlaying of education on an underlying platform of natural folk psychology. In reality, the distinction is not between people who live in the West and those who live elsewhere, but rather simply between those who have been exposed to a heavy-duty science-based education and those who have not. Ironically, the 19th century scholars may have been rather better informed about their subject matter than their later critics. They knew perfectly well, from their own ethnographic research, that these kinds of animist views were not only prevalent in historical Europe among the Celts and Germanic tribes, but continued to be widely believed among their own contemporary countryfolk well into the 20th century. Indeed, many seem to be still with us. Wishing wells are one familiar example of this. In the northern European tradition, sacred springs and wells have a long history dating back to Celtic and Germanic tribal times. Some springs or wells were thought to have healing powers. Others had the property of being able to fulfill any wish made at them. The habit of throwing coins or treasured objects into wells or pools, and making a wish while doing so, is still with us, even if, sometimes but not always, our belief in the efficacy of this practice is tempered with a degree of skepticism. Wishing trees are another example. The habit of attaching votive offerings or messages to the trunk or branches of a special tree were widespread throughout the British Isles and other parts of northern Europe. In India, the banyan tree, a member of the fig family that sits at the centre of almost every village, is also known as the kalpaviksha, wish-fulfilling tree. These kinds of phenomena attest to a belief in an occult world that is deeply ingrained in all our psyches.